one more welcome. It's the Qualitative and Quantitative Bridge Group, interested in getting outside our narrow lanes and doing great things together that lead to broader, richer insights. I'm Lou Rosenfeld, and I'm going to hand it off to our curators, Sam Zace and Yulia. Oh gosh, Yulia, I always mess up your last name. Let's see if I get it right this time. Ganu?
So in a nutshell, the Quant-Qual Bridge aims to facilitate and basically create a strong collaboration between qualitative and quantitative practitioners, be it UX research, data science, and we're highly interested in building a community, sharing the best practices, and making sure that we use our collective wisdom to decide on what we want to focus next and what are the main topics we're all interested in. Obviously, we're not limiting our audience to data scientists and UX researchers. Anyone is welcome. Anyone who has an interest in such a subject is more than welcome.
So again, thank you for coming to our session today and wanting to geek out. I hope we'll do that. All right, so as I said, my name is John Pagonis. I am a consultant, so I will tell you exactly what you already know, and it's going to be really simple. I work for Zansi Labs, and we try to help organizations produce useful software, yeah? So this is my Twitter handle and the company's handle. Okay, so every time, I know I shouldn't do it here, every time when I start a presentation, I actually give the definition of UX by Donald Norman, so that I don't have people jumping in saying, oh, but this is UX or this is CX, and no. So here's the definition, yeah? User experiences basically has to do with all aspects of the user's interaction with the company, services, and products, just to get out of the way. All right, so what I'm going to tell you is an amalgamation of few true stories. This is how I've experienced things with my teams in the past, and I'm just telling you my story. So if your story varies and you have different ideas, then probably you're right. I'm no expert, and you can interrupt me and ask me questions. This is how I've experienced things. Okay, so great UX, that's an interesting topic. Well, a couple of years back, we were asked at the UX department of a financial organization by certain CPOs, what is great UX and how can we measure it? Because we needed, and they needed, to actually prove that it's worth putting money on UX and not on just coding stuff very quickly and shoving it out of the door. And that's a very interesting question that we're called to answer. So naturally, my UX manager asked me to give a definition for the whole of the department. So after doing some research, we decided, because it was a financial institution, to actually focus on 4+1 main qualities of what makes a product having great UX. Yeah, and that's where it all started. We decided that for great UX to exist, the product has to have high utility, high usability, obviously. It has to be dependable. It has to have high desirability. And by dependability, I mean credibility, trust, reliability, and security. And also to have acceptable or zero contact risk, which is the risk of the user or the company losing money or their life, depending on the user making a mistake, a wrong decision. I'm not going to discuss this here today, but I'm just giving you the 5 dimensions which we decided defines great UX. In doing so, we had to figure out where to start, because we had to give to the organization some measures about actually finding out how they're doing in terms of all these qualities, you know, the Northern Star of what is great UX. So which qualities are the most important ones? We decided that the 2 most important, someone needs to switch off their mic. We decided that 2 of the most important qualities were utility and usability. And okay, we had strong opinion about that based on our experience and looking around. We also looked at other frameworks, UX measurement frameworks, and we got a bit of validation from the Government Digital Service in the UK, who has 14 principles, the top 5 of which, by which all new governmental projects are built, are based on user experience. The top 3 had to do with, and still have to do with, utility, and the next 2 had to do with usability. So there's a bit of prioritization that are embedded in the 14 principles of the GDS. So we got a bit of validation, we felt good, and we continued with the journey of defining great UX. Enter usefulness. So, as Jakob says, utility and usability are as equally important, and both of them to define usefulness. So usefulness is a function of utility and usability. And by utility, we mean functional adequacy. Yeah? If things have to exist, rather than being simple for the user to transact with. So here's the conceptual framework. Usefulness can be explained in 2 axes, that of utility and usability. Okay. On the usability axis, conceptually, there must be a point beyond which things are easy to use and where things are hard to use before that threshold. Yeah. And obviously, we want to be in the easy part. Also, in terms of utility, functional adequacy, there is a threshold above which things are needed, that are functionally adequate, and below which things are not needed. Yeah, and we shouldn't be below that line. Okay. The bottom left segment, quadrant, is that of total waste, where things are not needed and hard to use. So basically, there's no reason for actually building these features in a product, yeah? Because nobody needs them and they're hard to use. And unfortunately, the industry is full of software and hardware, I could say, which is never or rarely used. Depending on which survey you believe, since the 60s, you know, more than 60% of all software is rarely or never used. Think of the 15,000 features that Word has there, for example. Okay. Also, at the bottom right quadrant, where things are easy to use, we still find waste. Because if you create something which is easy to use, but not needed, you're potentially an artist, but definitely you're not making a profitable product. Okay, so what we want to achieve is to be above the so-called waste line. We want to be at least in the top left quadrant, the quadrant of functional adequacy, where things are needed. Typically in new product development, you will start from there. You will create a backlog that has things that are definitely needed. Maybe you don't know how to make them easy at this point, but at least you should have done the work to find what is needed before you continue with your product development journey. And ultimately, you want to be on the top right quadrant, where things are both needed and easy to use. Doing the right thing and doing it right. So this is the conceptual model of usefulness. But how do we know if a product is useful?
John, sorry, can I interrupt you before you continue?
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat from Amelia. Amelia, do you want to
Come on, Amelia.
Oh, I was just reflecting on kind of where search engines might fit now, kind of based on informational usefulness. It was more of an aside, not a question, but you're welcome to answer it if you feel
So what's the question?
Sort of where search engines might fit based on informational usefulness in your quadrant.
Oh, based on my totally unsubstantiated opinion. I think they're extremely useful. Yeah, but how many do you know? And do you remember the last time you switched from your previous search engine? There's a reason.
That I do. That I do. I switched probably 2 years ago. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So search engines actually are really useful because we cannot live without them, and basically that proves that. Well, okay, we're going to see this at the end of the presentation. I have a special section for that question. Okay, anyone else? Sorry. So how do we know that any product or even a search engine is useful? Well, we can measure it. And probably the easiest thing to measure is perceived usefulness, because perception is reality for the user. Yeah. And perception basically involves self-reporting. Okay. How can we do that? That's an interesting question. And that's why I said perceived usefulness, because objective usefulness is much more difficult to measure. Okay. So there is an instrument, measurement instrument called UMUX-Lite. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's been becoming more and more popular. So UMUX-Lite is a 2-item questionnaire that is applicable after you conduct a study, or if you have a regular user of a system and you want to do a retrospective study, which measures both utility and usability. It was created back in 2013 by James Lewis and his team at IBM, and has been since tested and retested and revalidated by many academic and non-academic efforts. Very reliable, extremely valid. And it also correlates with the likelihood to recommend questions like the NPS, for example. Okay. Here's the instrument, the first version of the instrument released in 2013. 2 simple questions. Edge labeled, and the only thing you can change is the system, the green word. You can say, blah applications capabilities meet my requirements, or blah applications easy to use, or you can say this system is easy to use. Yeah, 2 simple items, 7-point scale. It's basically an agreement scale, and you just deploy that to the users after a study, or in retrospect if they're regular users of a system. Yeah. Then that was improved, and the simplified version, which is the one I prefer, goes like this: product X features meet my needs, or functionality of function. That was a simplified version. It's very popular. Maybe you have seen it in systems you use. Then Jim Lewis and Jeff Soro, that have done amazing work, simplified further and created another version of this. And all these versions have been tested with each other, so they're equivalent. Yeah. Product does what I need to do. Product is easy to use. So you can say, Google search does what I need to do. Probably not always, but Google search is easy to use. Yeah. And then this year, I believe, they created another version, which I don't like very much, which is this one. Product is useful, product is easy to use. The useful word is a bit difficult for me to stomach, because usefulness is a function of utility and usability, and having useful here is a bit contradicting to my OCDs, and probably difficult to translate in other languages compared to the other ones, which are really easy to translate. Anyway, this is the instrument that I have used in the past many times to actually measure usefulness. Any questions so far? Okay.
Not in the chat. I might have one though, just out of curiosity, because I saw, I think, in one of the citations that it was sort of framed as an alternative to SAS, and I can definitely recommend or acknowledge that this is a lot shorter and easier to kind of get across than SAS. I'm curious if you have any thoughts sort of couching this against the SAS scale.
The reason why we like UMUX-Lite, it's because it measures utility and usability, whereas the SAS measures utility and has a minor component with, I believe, items 4 and 10, which test for learnability. So there are two regression functions that allow you to map UMUX-Lite back to SAS. Yeah, the original one and a simplified one, which is probably better. So if you have a database of systems that have scored with SAS, you can use them to compare with a new system because you can map back to the SAS. Yeah. Okay. And actually, that was one of my slides. But then, okay. Yeah.
Sorry to get ahead, but
so let's see an example then. So this is important. So in this example, that was a study on internal enterprise systems. We looked at perceived usefulness of 14 systems. And we also at the same time conducted interviews and we performed contextual inquiry. So already you see that we have quant and qual in one study, yeah? We recruited participants and these participants were of the organization using the enterprise systems. So these were colleagues, but we didn't ask them about if they like our software. They didn't know who we were, and we told them we didn't write the software, obviously. And because these were internal system of the organization, we wanted to improve the systems that these participants were using. Because UMUX-Lite is so simple, we gathered the data through web forms, paper, and even email. And the reason why we did that is because some of these people actually were working on black and white monitors and terminals, yeah? So they didn't have access to the internet or other ways of actually rerouting them to, user-friendly web forms or whatever. So paper, email, web forms, okay. So in doing this study, we investigated 14 systems. And we did the following. Don't be scared by the two tables. What we did is we collected the data in terms of utility and usability. And then we summarized for every system the data, as you see on the right table, in terms of their distribution. Yeah? And for each of those systems, we actually created an entry in a data matrix. Yeah. So you have the data, utility, and usability, people answering the questions. You create a summary of the distribution, and then basically you add it to a data matrix with all systems. Yeah. In our case, it was 14 systems. All right. And you obviously measure a lot of stats, but let's not go there now. Okay. And what we did after that, to complement the interviews and the contextual inquiry, we created visualization like this. Okay, the moment you get such a visualization, you know where you stand. You have 5 systems here, yeah, and you score them in terms of utility and usability. And at this point, you know where things stand. You can start thinking about analyzing and making decisions. Okay, but obviously you cannot do that if you don't go and conduct qualitative research. But you have a picture of where things stand. Okay, that picture is a snapshot in time, which may improve or deteriorate. It's a baseline for all future measurements. Yeah, it gives a way to prioritize and focus efforts. Which system am I going to go for? The reason why we conduct these studies is because we want to decide where to allocate budget. So that was a very important exercise. Which systems of value need to be improved because people are suffering or not suffering? That was one of the questions, the research questions for the study. Okay. Now, you can do this and you can conduct it not on a persistent basis, but on a per feature area basis or on a per persona basis, if you like. Yeah? If you have enough information, you can slice and dice such study the way you want it. You can actually say, what is the usefulness for persona X on this subsystem of the ERP, for example, invoicing. You can do that. Okay. The nice thing with UMUX-Lite is that since 2017, and sorry for the link, it's a bit awkward, Jeff Soro has been collecting measurements to which you can compare. So there's a database that measuring you have where you can, you can buy it and you can compare and contrast your systems with existing systems out there. And you can obviously build your own map for your organization. What you can also do is use the curved grade scale and map back to it, either directly or through the SUS. And you can actually figure out where you stand on the CGS. Yeah. Right. So in terms of usefulness and what signals you can pick up. Okay. Bridging qual and quant again. Let's analyze the previous data matrix that Julia referred to and how qual can help us. Okay, immediately we can see that there are at least two clusters, the applications on the top right and the application on the bottom left. Interesting, okay. And you can see there is almost a linear correlation between usability and utility. When utility increases, usability increases. And also there's one horizontal and vertical line. These are the thresholds of the good enough, which I'm going to discuss soon. Okay. So by getting this picture of the signals, you can figure out that something is happening. There are signals, but why? To figure out the why, you need to combine it with the qual work you're doing. So when we're doing this work, we discovered that the top right cluster is a cluster of enterprise applications that have been there for a long time, whereas application 1 and 2 were the newest ones. And when we went on to investigate, we found out that for application 1, there had been no UX person involved in the organization. It was all built by developers. So when we observed people using application 1, we saw them struggling. Okay, that corroborates the story of the signal. We also looked at app 5 and app 4 and 3 and found out that these old systems have been used for ages in the organization. And people knew how to use them. Okay, that's interesting as well. Recently, they have had UX help, and users reported, during the contextual inquiry, so let's say at the end of the contextual inquiry, that they were getting better. That's interesting. But the most important thing is that all of them fell below the thresholds that we set for good enough software. So that immediately told the CPO they need to invest because it wasn't good enough. And we corroborated that because we interviewed people, again, qual data, and we found out that they needed more from these systems. And during the contextual inquiry, we saw that, yes, they could use them, but many times they were basically using Excel spreadsheets to finish their job because some steps were difficult to use. Again, quant and qual. Okay. Does this answer your question, Julia?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, right. Let's continue. Now, about these thresholds. Okay, here the threshold is set at the 80% of the scales. Yeah. This is taken from the original work by Nielsen Levy from 1994, where they did a meta-analysis of about 1,000 studies, and they figured out that people tend to be polite and may tend to give more positive ratings if you ask them to rate a system. It may not be the same if you do it out there and they don't see you and you just pop up, a window and ask people for the feedback. But it seems to hold true, and actually Jeff Soro has been using that 8% mark as well. although recently it looks like there are some new numbers that Luis has discovered around the 70% mark. But anyway, so far in our work, we've used the 80% scale. Okay, let's see another example. So imagine you have 3 different applications in your organization, 3 different properties, if you like. And let's say you have 3 product areas. You're probably going to have more product areas. Product areas could be things like sales, invoicing, or it could be claims processing, or it could be like savings, investments, credit cards, whatever. So you have 3 different applications and many product areas. In this case, let's say 3. Okay. And you do a scatter plot in time of the data you receive from a study similar to the one I presented earlier. And things look a bit like this. You can see that the blue application, the mobile application, is doing better than the other apps. The IVR is the voice recognition application, and the web is desktop web. Immediately, you see there is a linear correlation between utility and usability, which is interesting, and that mobile app is doing well enough. So as a CPO, you can see, okay, the team over there is doing well. The other 2 teams, the other 2 applications need some attention. That's that's a signal you pick up immediately. Okay. So why is it that the savings product area for the mobile application is above all the other savings applications? And why is it on the left? So usability is not good enough, but utility is good enough. Is it because we did good generative research and we nailed the product backlog? And we know the journeys, the user journeys that we have to give the users, but maybe perhaps we haven't done a good task analysis or interaction design to make it easy? Let's conduct some discount usability and figure it out. What other data do we have from Qual work? That's an interesting signal. Okay. What about the credit card servicing feature of the web application? Yeah. Is it missing features? Because we can see that the usability of that part of the application is in par with the mobile and IVR ones, but it is struggling. It's not good enough in terms of utility. That's an interesting signal. Maybe users need more from this application. And you can say that we have given them more in other channels, like the web and IVR, but not, like mob and IVR, but not on the web. Why is this so? Is it that it's difficult to implement, going back to the product backlog, or is it that we miss these needs? And we need to do more generative work and figure it out. Again, these are signals that we can interpret with qualitative work. Okay. Let's see about these 2 clusters. Okay. It looks like savings and loans, in terms of the product offering, are fine for the mobile application, but they're not fine for the web and IVR. So now we have a separation between the product proposition, product offering, and the execution, the transactional part, offered by these applications. If you were to look at just the green and red applications, you could say that loans and savings, in terms of product propositions, are not good enough. But you cannot say that, because for mobile phones, it is good enough. So now the product manager, or the people responsible for designing, for example, the savings contracts or the loans contracts, can actually go to the product owners of the system and say, look, guys, we've designed an excellent offering for savings for our customers, but they don't seem to be able to actually transact with it very well. Why is this so? Is it something in the software that is not right? Because the proposition seems pretty right, yeah? we offer you cars at a very low rate. Let's say it's a leasing company, yeah? And we can see that people on the mobile applications, the blue application, lease our cars, but they don't do it from over the phone or on the web. What's going wrong there? Because the contracts are the same, the data are the same, the content is the same, but the transactional part seems to be struggling for the user because utility is really low and usability is really low. What happens there? Again, you pick the signals and you need to conduct some qual work to figure out the why. Here's another interesting way of presenting the same data. So if you regularly measure usefulness, you can have this view. I call this the Andes view from a very discerning product owner who introduced me to this. Okay, so one of these dots per application is tracked in time. Okay, what do we see here? First of all, it's a product area, let's say car loans, yeah, across 3 applications, IVR, let's say web and mobile. Okay. At the bottom, we see releases, not time or months. And this is very important. What happens here is that you can track the progress in terms of usefulness on a release-to-release basis, and the time between releases can vary. And why do you do it on a per release basis? Because you can go back to the backlog and see which items influenced or withinly influenced the measurement result. Yeah, it's not on a month-by-month basis, although in this particular case, they were pretty close. It's on a release-per-release basis. Okay. So we can immediately see that application 3 is doing all right and actually improving. Application 2 is deteriorating. Okay, we need to do something course correct and fix it in terms of utility at least. And application 3 is doing nothing. So we're putting money into application 3 and there's no progress. That's information. Okay. Other signals. What happened between release 7 and release 8 and release 11 and 12 for utility to deteriorate? You cannot tell from Quant. You have to go and figure out why by looking to the backlog, by conducting usability sessions, by talking to users, looking at feedback perhaps, and observing them. But you have pretty strong signals to budget for such research. Did we remove features that users needed? Did we add features that got in the way? Shall we conduct some findability studies and find out if people cannot find what they used to use? A better way of answering this would be if you use both utility and usability visualizations. So these two graphs are pretty similar, but not quite. Yeah. For example, between release 11 and 12, we see a deterioration in both utility and usability. That's a pretty strong indication that we removed features that prevents users from achieving their goals, or that we added features that get in the way. If utility goes down and usability goes down, it's pretty much that you've removed something or put something in the way. But what about release 7 to 8? Usability hasn't dropped significantly. Well, it could be content issue. Maybe you had a system that allows you to lease cars and you have removed Toyotas. Nothing to do with the software, nothing to do with the product, nothing to do with the UX design. It all has to do with the content. Maybe people could book holidays in Costa Rica and now they can't. So utility will go down, but usability will say the same, most likely. Maybe you're in the consumer space, and suddenly you decided that the pro version of your freemium application or the free version of your pro application will have less capabilities. So the users complain this way. They tell you that, okay, usability is fine, but my utility has dropped because you only allow me to store 5 files or whatever. I don't know. Again, to figure this out, you have to go and conduct qual work. But these are strong signals for you to go and do them. Any questions so far?
There's one question in the chat room from RP. And then, yeah, just realize the time as well. I think we only have like around 10 minutes.
I have plenty of time if you want to ask questions. I love questions.
Yeah, so I think,
yeah, I think there's a few comments in the chat that are kind of getting towards that discussion point that Omid started, and additional questions in the same dimension. So just thinking about usability and utility all up, and what, when are they appropriate? Are there other alternatives? I'm not sure. I think you said that there was content that you had towards the end that was going to touch on that.
Okay, so I'll continue then. Right, so about picking up signals, Quant UX research offers signals which we ought to investigate with qualitative UX research. What meets the why? Yeah, you cannot just do only with one. Now, very important part, the red pill version of my presentation. I'm going to be really quick and gentle. How confident are we that we're not wrong with these visualizations and graphs and measurements in doing quant? That's a scary question. And typically, we're pretty wrong. Okay. Basically, every time you get a point estimate from some measurement out there, you are wrong. Yeah. So you need to compute the confidence interval. So the same graph I showed you at the beginning with the 5 application actually is like this. You have a point estimate and the margin of error left and right and top and bottom of every point. And the wider is the confidence interval, the margins of error from the left and the right, the weaker is the signal. But does this mean we shouldn't use the signal? Of course we should. Actually, if we have a very weak signal, we ought to investigate before it becomes a really strong one that actually might cost a lot of money or time to our organization. So every time, I didn't do this initially because it would be too much information. Every time we actually use point estimates from usefulness, we must accommodate for the error bars, for the confidence intervals. So for example, in this visualization, you can see, yes, we have 2 clusters, top right and bottom left. And yes, the usability, for example, of application 1 can vary a lot because we didn't have enough people during the study, so the confidence interval is wide. But you can still see that is below the thresholds, really important information. And it's far away from the top right, from the green and the blue applications. So we ought to go there and investigate and look at what other data we have, for example, from contextual inquiry, usability study, or whatever else have you. Yeah. So every time we give a point estimate to management and we ask for a budget, we need to give it with plus or minus or margin and say, look, we think the application is this good or this bad, give or take X. And typically, we should probably communicate the worst case study, the worst case scenario. This is a very important view because this is the true view of how our systems fare, basically. Point estimate with confidence intervals. Yeah. Weak signals have high margins of error. Strong signals have very small margins of error. And the moment you present this to someone that actually can sign off budget, they know that you've done your homework and that these signals are to be really trusted. Okay? Some parting thoughts before we go into our conversation. When we measure usefulness regularly, we can answer, how good are we right now? Have we done our jobs well enough? Where do we need to pay attention? Are we improving? Where's all this money going? And how do we compare against others? Yeah. And here's the law of usefulness I have observed. A product that has low utility will always lose to one with high utility. Yeah, because it will be, will do more. And one with high utility, but with inadequate usability, will eventually lose to one which has more usability. And obviously a product that has low utility usability will crash and burn. The consequence of this is that usefulness is, in my view, in my experience, the ultimate weighing machine for a product's long-term ROI. If your product is useful, it's going to make money, it's going to survive the competition, it's going to win. Take care of that. And to answer a previous question, no, I don't think there's a substitute for measuring usefulness. And hopefully you want to measure usefulness as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John, very much for that. Yes, I see some virtual applause in the video calls. So I know Lou has some back-to-back sessions, which might mean that we have to bounce out of here in about a minute. So I'm going to move some of the conversations over to the Slack channel, especially this one that's focused on just sort of the particular metrics. And I'm hoping that you all can engage with us there. I think we have time for one brief question, and maybe the brief question I'll bring in is the one from Bernardo, which is just visualizations and how you generated those. What tool were you using for that?
Oh, what tool? Oh, okay. That's very simple. R code. But it doesn't matter it doesn't matter what tool you use. You could be using spreadsheets or whatever, but it was using R Studio and R code to visualize these things. It's things I've developed through the years for visualizing data, but it's not an important thing. I mean, any other questions about usefulness?
I'll make things easy and I'll copy Omid's and Arpi's questions in the Slack channel so we can kind of pick up on those conversations from there before we get the recording and everything. And hopefully that will kind of bring more meat to the bone and get the conversation going.
Yeah, so more discussion to happen. We're just going to move it to the Slack channel because I think so the meeting can be repurposed for the next thing for Lou, right?
I don't know. I have time. I mean, whatever you guys want.
Let me just chime in really quickly. Yeah, I do need to take the channel back. My apologies. But first of all, let me thank John for a fantastic presentation. Really meaty, really needed. And Sam and Yulia for putting it together and keeping our energy and momentum moving forward.